Hello, welcome to St Clement's for this week's collective worship. Over the last few weeks we've been thinking about St Paul and how his life changed around after he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, and he went from someone filled with anger and hate to someone who kind of travelled the world telling people about the message of Jesus. And a week ago was one of his festivals, one of the times when we remember him. But it was a joint festival. It's called the Feast of Peter and Paul. So St. Peter and St. Paul. So I thought this week, maybe next week, not sure yet, we'd have a think about St. Peter. Some of you know a bit of his story, which we're going to recap shortly, but then there's other bits to come as well. First of all, though, we're going to sit still as we're able as we say our opening prayers.
We light a light in the name of God the Father, who made us.
We light a light in the name of God the Son, who lives among us.
We light a light in the name of God, the Spirit who helps us.
We light three lights for the Trinity of love, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
So St. Peter, there's lots we know about him, little snippets throughout the Gospels and in Acts, and we can't cover all of those things, but we're going to take a few of them because these few bits taken together make a kind of one story. So we best start at the beginning. Simon Peter, was a fisherman. He worked with his brothers, probably his dad as well. He was the impulsive one. He was the one always jumping in feet first before thinking. One day, Jesus came to the Sea of Tiberias, where Peter worked, and asked Peter to be one of his followers. So Peter, being Peter, didn't think about it, just immediately left, jumped in, joined Jesus, and eventually he became one of the kind of key leaders of Jesus' followers, of the disciples. After several years of travelling with Jesus, Peter was there on the night that Jesus was betrayed. You might remember Jesus had a special meal with his closest friends, and during this meal Jesus told them that one of them would betray him. But Peter said, "I will never do this. I'm ready to die for you." But Jesus replied, "Before the cockerel crows, you will deny you know me 3 times. "No, I will never do that," said Peter. Later that night, Jesus was arrested in the garden. Peter tried to defend Jesus, got out his sword and cut off one of the ear of one of the soldiers. But Jesus stopped him. He didn't want any fighting, and he went quietly with the soldiers. Peter followed at a distance to see what was happening. The soldiers took Jesus to the high priest's house when the priests questioned Jesus and accused him of all sorts of false things. But Peter stayed outside and warmed himself by a charcoal fire. One of the servant girls noticed Peter and said, This man is one of Jesus' followers." But Peter denied it. I'm not." Then another servant looked at him and said, "Are you sure you're not one of them?" But Peter again replied, "No, I'm not." A little while later, one of the soldiers who had arrested Jesus in the garden saw Peter and said, "Oh, weren't you with Jesus in the garden? You're definitely one of his followers." But Peter replied, "No, I do not know the man." And just then the cockerel crowed, and Peter remembered Jesus' words, "Before the cockerel crows, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter was so upset, he ran away and left that courtyard weeping. Now, after Jesus had died and been laid in the tomb, Peter was one of the disciples who went to the tomb and saw that Jesus had risen from the dead. And a little while later, Peter, not sure what to do, decided to go back to his old job. He went fishing. He suggested it to the other disciples and they all agreed. But all night they caught nothing. At dawn, they saw a stranger standing on the beach. The man shouted, "Have you caught any fish?" They replied, "No, not one." And the man replied, "Well, try throwing a net on the right side of the boat. You'll get some." So they did, and the net became full of fish, 153, they say. One of the men in the boat looked closely at that stranger on the beach and suddenly said aloud, "Look, it's the master." Jesus was so excited it was Jesus. He couldn't wait for the boat to get to the shore, so he jumped in and swam ashore on his own. When they got there, they found Jesus sat with a charcoal fire. Jesus told them to bring some fish, and he cooked them on the fire, and they had breakfast. At breakfast, Jesus said to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." A little while later, he asked again, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Tend my sheep." Then a third time, Jesus asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Well, Peter was getting a bit upset at all this questioning, so he said, "Yes, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." So Jesus said a third time, "Feed my sheep." And after that, Peter went on to be a great leader in the early church, especially the church in Rome. He was the first pope, and he taught people all about Jesus and God's love. Now, what we think Jesus was doing by asking those questions at the beach 3 times, he was kind of reminding Peter about the 3 denials he'd made in the courtyard of the high priest, but also kind of counselling them out, rubbing them out, offering Peter forgiveness for his betrayal, that Peter could have a fresh start, begin again, start anew, and go on to be this great leader in the church. And so one of the things Peter does, reminds us, is that whenever we make a mistake, whenever we upset someone, whenever it goes wrong, we can always say sorry. And God will forgive us, and we can try and rebuild that friendship, that relationship. Forgiveness is always there. We can always say sorry. And God is always ready, eager and willing and waiting to forgive and restore our friendships once again.